All right, everyone. So today I wanted to talk about the cause of suffering. Now, this is something that many different philosophies and religions and spiritual teachers have tried to talk about for a long time, and they've given different views and solutions, as far as why we suffer and what to do about that suffering. Regardless of whatever your religious views are, whether you're religious or an atheist or whatever religion you are, it's sort of an inescapable reality that we all have to deal with a certain degree of suffering in our lives. And for those of you who are, familiar with Buddhism a little bit, that's kind of the core of what that religion's all about. Buddha wanted to find out kind of what we're talking about here. What is the cause of suffering and what do we do about it? And that was sort of the foundation of the Buddhist religion, right? So some elements of that are going to be included in what we're discussing here today, but this isn't about Buddhism. We're going in a little bit different direction. So to me, I always wanted to know this for myself. There was a lot of suffering going on in my personal world or in the world all over the place. And I really wanted to know, what is this? I mean, what's this about? Why is this happening? I mean, people talk about wanting world peace, for example. Well, why can't we have it? What is it that's going on within us that's causing such an issue? To the point where we're not only unable to have world peace, but we're kind of fighting each other all the time, right? In sort of like small cases, like in family units, or big cases, like entire nations going to war with one another, right? So I took a journey to find the answer to this question, and I did indeed come across some stuff that I really liked, and I really wanted to just share it with you. I'm not saying this is the answer, right? I'm not saying you got to listen to what I'm saying here. I'm just saying that I explored a lot of stuff, and this is what I discovered that really brought it all together for me. I was on a spiritual path. I experimented with a lot of different paths and spiritual paths and stuff like that. I ultimately ended up learning something called Kriya Yoga meditation, which is fantastic. It allows you to really connect to the joy within in a very powerful way to calm your mind down, and it's sort of an all-around helpful method for all-around health and well-being, and being able to really tap into that inner light, that inner joy that's within us in a really direct and powerful way. But even with that, I was the type of person that really had trouble with, because I do believe in God, but it's kind of like, why, people have said, why does God allow suffering in this world? And some people say, well, there's free will, That never made any sense to me because, to me, it's like, yeah, maybe that applies to, it's like, okay, people have free will. So that means one person decides to be a psychopathic murderer. But how does that explain the poor child or the poor victim that has to be, subjected to abuse or just outright murder, right? Like what's with the levels of suffering that goes on in this world? So to me, it was sort of inescapable that God was either allowing this, right? Because in the Eastern, in the Western world, a lot of the religions, they have some kind of idea of like God being a supreme creator, and he creates the universe and the world and then interacts with it in different ways, or just sort of like, hanging back, like observing everything going on. In the East, there's different views of how this is like God's dream, right? Which we're kind of like in God's mind, I guess. Which, number one, I don't know how that works. If God is asleep, I don't really get that. But either way, like if God created this or we're in God's dream, the things that are happening to people are happening to us, whether it's some kind of test or challenge from God, or people say, oh, that's just your karma or something. And it's like, I don't understand. Like this, I mean, I understand like having to be held responsible if you do something really bad, right? Being brought to justice. But some of the stuff that goes on in this world is unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable levels of suffering that goes on and pain that people are in and inflict on other people. I mean, physical ailments, and then there's all kinds of just people having to deal with all kinds of different abuse and, raping and sometimes trafficking and just really crazy stuff. I mean, there's places on this planet right now where slavery is still going on, like underground slaves. There's like trades of like, kids being sold into slavery and stuff. So to me, I'm like, if this is a challenge, like what is like to me, it seems like things have really gone off the rails. And if God is all powerful, why isn't he stepping in to do something about this? Because, it's like one thing to have a game, right? It's like, okay, let's say that our experiences in this world are like a game. Well, like, isn't there a time where the ref has to call like a timeout because things are getting out of control, right? Because that's what I think and see and feel going on here. So it created something in my mind where I was like, I can't, it's hard to really get on board with a being that would just either put us through these insane trials or challenges just for whatever cosmic purpose he or she had in mind. Or if it's karma, it's like, but we have the concept of forgiveness, so why aren't you just forgiving that karma, right? I don't understand that. I don't get it, And then, or God is just kind of like letting this happen or watching it happen and is just fine with it. For me, it was hard to trust a being like that. It was hard to have a relationship with a being like that. And in the East, they always talk about, seeking God and desiring God. Even in the Bible, it talks about, seeking the kingdom of heaven first, like making that your main priority. Like you've got to make it a conscious decision and seek after it. And I was finding myself having trouble wanting to do that if God was, again, allowing this stuff to happen or doing it for some kind of reason or whatever it is. Like I had enough in my own life, right? Like I was like, I've had enough, and my suffering doesn't even come close to a lot of the suffering that goes on in this world. So it was a real problem for me. So fast forward, and somebody introduced me to a book called The Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard. And this is all about A Course in Miracles, if you haven't ever heard of it. If you know about A Course in Miracles and you like it, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Maybe you know about The Disappearance of the Universe. When I first came across A Course in Miracles, I wasn't against it, but I thought it was kind of like just New Age, just nothing bad, just another New Age. It seemed like a New Age Christian Buddhist fusion or whatever. And I was just more interested in the older, more established teachings, like the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible, So I wasn't against it. I just was like, it's just not my thing. It's not for me. But it kept popping back into my life. And I once I understood, what all the different religions and spiritual paths were saying, and I had my own experiences, it really kind of prepared me to be in a place where I could appreciate, the unique differences between A Course in Miracles and what the Disappearance was talking. And the Disappearance of the Universe is pretty much just kind of like fleshing A Course in Miracles out, like getting to the point of the course and what it's about and how to practice it and things like that. And I just thought it was absolutely amazing and brilliant because it answered all the questions that I always had in a way that I'd never seen before. And it made spirituality for me, it just made it more palatable and more approachable, and my interest in it was sort of rekindled because I saw that it was kind of like the paths that came before, right? Like Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And this isn't a religion, okay? But they only knew so much, right? Like each of them were kind of, they were doing the best they can at the time, right? But there's some pieces that were kind of missing. And A Course in Miracles kind of gives you the entire picture. And again, I don't expect you to believe me or even believe it. But if you practice it, and you read it and you learn what it's saying, it fits in my mind philosophically. And it's also extremely helpful as a practice, both for personal peace as well as walking a spiritual path of spiritual growth, right? So the things I learned in The Disappearance, and I also came across another teacher that was, she referred to herself as a Kumara, and what I learned was called Kumara wisdom, and we'll get into that at some other point. But to make a long story short with what the Kumara wisdom is saying, because the core of the Kumara wisdom is in A Course in Miracles, interestingly enough. And the whole idea is that, the world we're in and the world we see around us is kind of like a dream, and it is kind of like a dream from God. But it's a dream from the Son of God, which is us, rather than the Father. So what that means is everything we see going on is coming from our mind, right? A Course is teaching us, A Course in Miracles teaches us that, I know it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but it's like at the deepest unconscious level, we're sort of like punishing ourselves, right? Like we're keeping it's like we came to this world, we put ourselves in sort of a hellish situation, and God the Father did not put us here and does not require us to be here. So we have to kind of like master our own mind to realize that we never came here to begin with, right? So when you understand this, this is really like the deepest core of what the cause of suffering is, and also how to undo it, right? So, philosophically, right, in the Course it says that, God is the only thing that exists, and that what we really are as humans, and we're all kind of like one being. It appears like we're all these different people, but in reality, at the deepest level, we're all one being. We're sort of like an extension of God, right, which is bliss and wisdom and love and changelessness and eternity. And so that's our real nature. So it's kind of like one day we had this idea in our mind, right, of, we kind of like contemplated the concept of separation from God or from happiness and bliss. And because that was impossible to be separate from God, God the Father didn't respond, and then so it seemed like God disappeared in the mind of the Son, right? And so we reacted to that as the collective, like, Christ mind, and said, oh my God, I did something wrong, God is gone, God is angry with me, there's a punishment coming. And because we thought we kind of threw heaven away, there was this intense, like, collective feeling of shame, guilt, and self-hatred on a collective level. And we kind of collapsed within ourselves, and we projected this sort of escape universe where we could come to escape, right, the punishment of God. So the suffering I know that's kind of a quick run through there, but that's the core. We experienced a certain degree of shock, fear, and confusion when we believed that we were separate from our source, which is God, and love and light and all that stuff. So then we were like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that. We had shame, guilt, and sort of like self-contempt, right? And we kind of collapsed within ourselves and then just projected a dream universe where we could kind of like hide from the impending punishment of God, right? So like in Genesis, it talks about Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden. That's kind of what that story is talking about. Like we were in paradise, and then something happened, and we reacted with shame, guilt, and self-contempt, and we left that paradise, and now we're in a world of suffering. This is just meant to be like a really short, brief Cliff Notes version of this. I will link in the description below to both The Disappearance of the Universe and A Course in Miracles if you're interested in what we're talking about here and you'd like to learn more. And so obviously everything we see in our life, from if there's any dysfunction in our home life and whatever, by the way, everyone's going to have to go through something. It could be stuff in the home, it could be health issues, it could be something, maybe you have a great life in general, but something, happens to you out of left field seemingly, like you get like attacked by someone, or you have to deal with some kind of murderer or rapist or something, or the stock market crashes and you lose everything. It's always something that everyone has to deal with. And what the Course is saying is that these moments are sort of like symbolic projections of that original moment where we separated from God. So if you notice, what's interesting is every time something like that happens, whether it's somebody yelling at you or cutting you off in traffic or some kind of fight at home or something much bigger like a terrorist attack or something, there's always a sense of shock, fear, and confusion in our minds that we react to, and it kind of keeps this cycle of suffering going, right? So that's why the sages, right, they always talk about, to one degree or another, not reacting, right? Like training your mind to be like in the observer place and not reacting to the things that you see. It's not that you're not doing anything. It's more like you're responding rather than reacting kind of deal, right? And so with A Course in Miracles, what you're doing is you're practicing sort of a refined version of forgiveness in these situations where you notice that what's happening is happening in a dream. It's coming from your mind, and that the way to undo this is to see through it and not react to that situation. And at the deepest level of our unconscious mind, it kind of what's happening is it's allowing us to wake up gradually to our true nature, our true self, and our connection with the source of God and the light. And that is where unlimited bliss and happiness is. That's why they call it the kingdom of heaven, nirvana, moksha. And that's why our experience here is kind of like hell. It's kind of like the opposite of heaven, right? That's what this is. We have to experience suffering and all kinds of obstacles and hurdles, and then ultimately even death, right? Like even if everything in your life goes well, it's like things fall apart, things change and shift, and ultimately we die. So it's like, what's that all about? So when you understand that we're in kind of an illusion right now, what's cool is like we're talking about some deep philosophical stuff right now. But if you have this kind of like mindset as you go through your life, it can help you even just on the surface level to be able to sort of psychologically process all the crazy stuff that's happening, right? And make it make a little more sense. It also puts the power back in your hands if what you're seeing is coming from your mind and you're not a victim of what you see, rather than everything happening to you, right? Because that's how it seems. It seems like everything happens to us, right? And people say don't be a victim, but the truth is there's only one real way to do that, and that's if you are the source of everything that's happening in your world and the universe. And that's what the Course is saying at the deepest levels. But so the cause of suffering, as far as this philosophy is concerned, is that we believe we separated from our source, our true nature, love, bliss, wisdom, and eternal love, right? And that we are constantly sort of recreating this original trauma, is what I call it, and reacting to it. And we're constantly dealing with all kinds of shame and guilt and self-contempt, and we've got an inner critic to some degree or another that kind of, we put ourselves down, right? We have low self-esteem and we get into all kinds of problems. And so if you can adopt this thought system, because that's what A Course in Miracles is, it helps on the deepest spiritual levels, but it also helps with just day-to-day like inner peace and being able to process and cope with the things that are happening. So to me, it's just amazing. It's brilliant. So I'm the Course is sort of my, I don't know how else to say it, but it's kind of like something in the universe like assigned this to me, right? Like everybody has their own path. But this, to me, it was just a game changer. Again, I'm not saying you have to read it or believe it or whatever, but as someone who's gone through a lot of the different, religions and spiritual paths on the planet, and really kind of sifted through them and tried to practice them and tinker with them, this is the only thing that made it make sense and made spirituality more approachable and sort of doable, to be honest with you. Because a lot of those yogis and stuff, they're meditating like 8 hours a day. I mean, who in God's name like can do that? Like what's the point? What's up with that? And the reason is because they're not addressing the core issue, which is addressed in the Course, which is that initial moment of shock, fear, and confusion that we keep reacting to. So that's kind of the cause and of suffering from my point of view and from the view of A Course in Miracles. We're kind of like crucifying ourselves on a regular basis without even realizing it, but practicing sort of like non-judgment, being the observer, and true forgiveness is the way to inner peace, both in the world and sort of like ultimate peace, which is like spiritual awakening, right? Which is what the Course calls atonement. So I just kind of wanted to jump on and share that with you because, there's a lot going on in the world in general, but especially now, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So it's like when we talk about world peace, it's like, because there's always some tyrant out there, right? Like some bad guy or bad group of people. But if we change the way we see things to where what we're seeing is sort of like a projection of an internal conflict, again, it's not that we're not acting in the world the way we need to, right? But we are internally not reacting and reinforcing all this stuff to keep going on. and it allows us to have deeper peace. And when we all have that inner peace, then we can have a world of peace, right? So I just kind of felt inspired to share that with you. That's pretty much all I got for you for this video. I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.